Hey Daniel, how's it going?
Hey Evan, it's good. Busy day. One of our newest puppy got vaccinated, so that was fun and vomiting in the car. So I've been helping my wife a little bit with clean up between meetings. How's your day going?
It's been a crazy rollover from the weekend. Family medical issues, things like that happen. Waiting for the hospital to call me and tell me if my mom's gonna get discharged or not. So, yeah. So it's been a little rough, but trying to make do and rolling off my client assignment. It's dwindling down, so I'm able to jump in and work on some podcast stuff for a change. So it's nice. Should we get started with today's episode?
Yeah, you want to tell everybody about it, myself included, because this is a topic I feel like I am very inadequate to speak to, but I'll do my best today.
Well, I think when we hit the debate section, we're going to talk a little bit more about CMS's publications of some new rules that have come out and how actually one of our clients is addressing it and partnering with one of our very own in the mid-cycle to figure things out. So I'm excited for that, and it'll lead into a little bit of kind of just general education as well at the beginning of the episode. So it's kind of where we're at today.
Cool. Let's introduce guests, and I'll introduce our first guest. As always, I always have our first introduction. So, background in health information management, HIM, along with her RHIA, which I might need explanation for what that stands for, and is a certified outpatient coder. Spent the last decade in clinical and corporate compliance, and currently the manager of compliance, auditing, and monitoring at Highmark Health, Allegheny Health Network. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for introducing me. Just to give you a background, RHIA stands for Registered Health Information Administrator.
There
So
you go.
thank you
I
for
learned
having
something
me.
new. And maybe you live in Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania, but on the other side. So always fun to have some PA folks on the podcast.
Pittsburgh. I'm in Pittsburgh. Go
Nice.
Steelers.
Well, I get the pleasure of introducing our second guest. I think I always get to introduce her when she's rejoining. I think it might be her third or fourth episode with us now. At least she's had a couple of repeats. She specializes also in the mid-cycle, former Epic experience prior to joining Wilshire. She's done tons of implementations, helps organizations with optimization. She also tries to lead our clients to success as our director of client success with the Wilshire Group. Welcome back, Jen.
Good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me. I was psyched that I got to bring Leslie with me this time. We've been working together for many years on projects at Allegheny Health Network, so it's nice to be able to bring her on the podcast.
Well, let's start out with the hot topic, shall we? That's not
Do it.
okay. All right. So, Evan, I think you were the one who brought this hot topic forward about maybe, I don't know. I thought you did, but provider education. And I'm curious what y'all's take on, and maybe from an AHM perspective, on education models or programs around quarterly and annual updates, as they just they always keep coming. Curious what y'all have thought about for provider education.
So thanks. I can kind of take that. So at AHN, the compliance department actually has oversight of provider education for all of our physicians when it circles around anything related to an evaluation and management service. And therefore, my team here at AHN does it in a multiple different fashions, actually. We have some training modules that we provide to any new provider who onboards with us over the course of the year. They have a 30 to 45 day window to kind of, complete those. We give them a little extension where need be, and then we, go out and do an audit of them. Those for our providers that are here, then annually we provide education to all of our institutes. That's how we, ortho, OB-GYN, family medicine, etc. And we provide education every December for all of the new changes that are coming down the pike for January. And we do that collaboratively with the revenue cycle team, specifically our coding department as well.
Now, Jen, I was wondering how you got plugged into this. What have you been involved in some of that that education and the quarterly annual updates?
Well, AHN is my first customer where I've really been plugged into the E&M education. And the reason why I've been plugged in is because we've been working on a multi-year project around optimizing and enhancing the workflows between APPs, so advanced practice providers, which are our physician assistants and our certified registered nurse practitioners, and their workflows with their supervising physicians in both the clinic and in the hospital. And so as a part of that, it's a really good chance the annual education that Leslie's team provides has been a good opportunity for us to educate or re-educate, as the case may be, about workflows that we've changed over the past year or things coming down the pipeline. And most recently for us, it's been in regards to really trying to drive home the messaging around split shared in the hospital setting, what that means, how it's to be used, and additionally with some clarifications that CMS just published for the year 2024.
For our listeners, that's what we'll jump into after our break and dive deep into that. So what are some methods that you guys are leveraging for education, and how are you partnering with other segments of the revenue cycle and billing compliance to ensure that they're helping along? Because it's not usually just a compliance team component. There's definitely a huge aspect probably with other elements of the revenue cycle you're tapping into.
Sure. Yeah, I can take that just quickly. So again, we set up education. We message and brand out to our institute leaderships, to try to make these education sessions, publish them so that people know about them. I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
PR around them, the public relations around them, trying to get that out.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that's always great and successful. One of the challenges that we face is then getting everybody to show up, right? The audiences that we need. And we understand that, clinicians, whether they be APPs or physicians, are very busy, and at the forefront of their daily work is to take care of our patients, which we would like them to do. But we have that important piece of how we take care of them and we want to be reimbursed for them. And how do we get that message across that, hey, we need some education, some things have changed this year. So we do definitely partnership, again, with institute leadership, because of some of the workflows and some of the auditing that my team does, and then some of the things that get caught in the coding and revenue cycle work queues. Then we're able to identify additional providers who may or may, need some additional education and guidance, and we can kind of specific and target and reach out to them specifically. And also we've had great success in not getting the whole group there, but then we have the institute saying, hey, can you come to our monthly meeting for us? Can you meet with our residents? Can you meet with a small APP group and our leaders? So we definitely have that intimate relationship with all of our providers, where they definitely know to reach out, and we're happy to provide, that one-on-one service.
One thing that I've noticed at AHN working with them, as a consultant, is there is a extremely close relationship between our coding and compliance teams. They even have like a Microsoft Teams channel where coding can ask questions to compliance can ask questions to coding, and they can kind of collaborate on things that are coming up, whether it be a compliance audit or a coding audit or a coding question. And so I think that's something that AHN does really well. I've been very impressed. I've never been working with a health system where coding and compliance work this closely together. So that's been really impressive for me to see at the AHN level.
Are you guys partnering with Revenue Integrity and CDI at all to, make sure that they're bringing it through on their portion? Because there's other providers, right, who can bill that aren't technically physicians or APP level providers, that mid-level component, that, respiratory therapist, etc. So.
Yeah, so we do work with Revenue Integrity and CDI. We CDI does sit in that, well, so does RI, into the revenue cycle. And we work really closely with them as well on audits that we kind of do and things that we identify when we're looking at them. We identify, hey, was CDI involved in this case? Did CDI query a physician for something? Were they involved in that record? How did we get to the point where now coding applied something? And so that it is a unified team effort, so to speak. And we do provide that feedback back to them as well. I know there's currently some changes with our leadership in the CDI outpatient space in the clinics. But one of the physicians who is leading that charge also has shares some time with the inpatient side and now is going to do the outpatient. And we actually do work with him as well to say, hey, we're seeing this. Can you please provide some education and some topics around that? So we do collaborate with them, and revenue integrity as well. We meet with them like pretty monthly, Jen.
One member of the RI team attends our APP weekly meetings and kind of reports back. And so that's helpful, I think, to have that integration as well.
I know you mentioned earlier one of the biggest challenges is just getting folks to show up to be part of the training. What are some of the other challenges that you've ran into just rolling this out and getting a program set up?
I think one of the challenges is just being able to get the message out timely, right? Because, CMS doesn't release the final rules until the very end of November. Typically, you've got a quick turnaround time on let's get some education set up. Now we're getting close to the holiday season, and then you want to convert anything that needs changed, so to speak, or updated is right over that, when everyone wants to take their time off. So that can kind of be challenging at times. And again, I really think it's just getting people to understand the importance that goes along with it. What's that documentation that you need to write? I think at the end of the day, all the providers want to do the right thing. They want to treat the patient. And I think they want it in a simple message. Okay, compliance or coding, tell me what to do. They want the checkbox, right? They want to say, okay, if I do A, B, and C, then I can do results in, D, right? I think sometimes getting that messaging across simply to them, because sometimes we speak in coding and billing language and they're speaking clinical language, can kind of be challenging at times.
It's very difficult to simplify it the way that you want to give that message across to people who are taking care of patients on a daily basis. I think that as I've learned more about E&M facility charging and how, okay, these rules apply to the majority, but not if you're charging based upon time for critical care or ACP, or not if you're doing per diem charging for, neonatal or pediatric critical care, or even there's per diem charging for some specialties that is not critical care. And it just gets very confusing, especially when you're trying to do the things that we've been trying to do the last couple of years, which is give a simple system-wide direction that everyone can follow. And that's a very difficult thing to do with some of these because of the complexity, I feel, of, the American billing system and that kind of thing in healthcare. It's overtly complex in some areas that make it hard to boil down that message to something that can be given out to a very, very large group of people on a yearly basis and for them to understand it.
So, well, on that note, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
At ValueWare, we help healthcare organizations streamline prior authorization submissions with one platform, helping you simplify, connect, integrate, and automate each part of the process. We take your pre-existing workflow and truly automate it, including the submission and verification process. The best part? ValueWare automates your prior authorization processes for all of your payers, specialties, and service lines, not just some of them. Valor is built around you. Learn more at valueware.com. That's valueware.com. Are you ready to unlock the full potential of your medical coding team? Look no further than Adeo Technologies, the leading provider of medical coding productivity solutions. With Adeo's Gemini Solution Suite, medical coders are empowered and complemented with cutting-edge tools and technologies. The Gemini Coder Platform, Gemini Autocode, and Gemini Coding Assist solutions work seamlessly together, creating efficiency and improving accuracy in medical coding. Say goodbye to tedious manual processes, cheat sheets, and memorization, and embrace the power of workflow improvements, artificial intelligence, and predictive coding. At Adeo, we believe in the collaboration between medical coders and artificial intelligence to create coding capacity that makes human coders more valuable to their healthcare organizations. visit our website at www.adeo-tech.com. It's adeo-tech.com to learn why we love coders and how Adeo Technologies is transforming medical coding productivity one claim at a time.
And we're back.
All right, we're moving into the debate section. We don't have a name yet, I don't think, for this episode, do we? For the debate?
Not yet.
Not yet. We'll have something together, and maybe the AI bot will spin out something fun.
I saw something cool. It was like split share, say what, or something like that. I like that.
Yeah,
I gotta get that approved by marketing still.
So if you're listening, that is one of the potential names for this podcast. But we're gonna dive into the segment where we're gonna discuss industry trends, out of the box ideas, topics that get you thinking. Evan, you want to kick us out with first question?
Yeah, as Jen alluded a little bit about this whole split share component, Leslie, we really wanted to get kind of your take on, as you're looking at education with providers and in this year's CMS rules, and especially around those big challenges around split share. Can you tell us how this is impacting providers, and maybe give our listeners a little bit more context what actually split share is, because they might not know, not being in the portion of revenue cycle that's impacted, right?
Sure. I'm happy to. So let me take the first part of that, or the last question you asked, and answer that first. So what is shared split? Shared split, or split shared, it's referred to both ways in the industry. I think it depends on how it rolls off your tongue better. But that is a concept in the inpatient facility setting or any outpatient apartments of a hospital. So it's facility related. It does not apply in an office/clinic setting. So just want to level set that so everybody understands that. CMS came out actually in 2023 and made that very, very clear. So I just want to kind of give that background. So what that means is that if you're a patient in the hospital, and let's just use the hospitalist service line for an easy example. A physician may work with APPs. Again, that may be a physician assistant, a certified nurse practitioner. And the nurse practitioner may do a portion of the work. So maybe they get the history of the patient that day or get the exam. But later on in the day, the physician comes by, may or may not see the patient, but works with the APP and collaborates together. And together they can use their documentation, both of theirs. So they're sharing and splitting the visit, and they can make it becomes a billable service. So they use the documentation of both providers to bill for the service. Now, what happens? Who gets to bill? That's the tricky part, and that's where we came into, how do we make this work, right? Here at AHN, and probably others are struggling with that elsewhere as well, because there's two things that you can do. And CMS was going to go to an all-time based shared split in 2024, and then at the last minute they kind of backed it right on off of that and said, nope, we're going to hold on doing all time based right now, and we can still bill shared split services, not based on time, but rather on medical decision making and that plan of care. So how do we go about doing that? Whose documentation to use and what needs to be there? And so that's kind of what shared split is. Jen, do you want to add anything to that before we get into how we kind of did that?
Yeah, I think even taking like a step further back, when Leslie talks about kind of a billable service, what that typically equates to is an H&P if it's the patient's first day in the hospital for the service, or a progress note. And it is started by the APP typically, and then attested to by their supervising physician. So one note that represents an E&M code that will be dropped is that billable service that we're charging for. So if that makes sense, it's kind of, that is how it is the work of both the APP and the physician that makes it a split shared service and a split shared E&M code that we're dropping. And your health system may, like ours, may have bylaws that require in the hospital for all APP's notes to be co-signed. And so that means that the physician, no matter if it's a split shared visit or not, is co-signing every one of the APP's notes. That doesn't mean that each of those notes represents a split shared service. Sometimes the APP could just be working individually by themselves to the top of their license, and the physician is just co-signing their note as a supervising provider.
So with that, when you guys are looking at it in that development process, how are you guys going to do attestation and actually like count for that? Because like it's saying it's this, right? But actually being able to do it and then show it in an audit perspective, like dive a little bit deeper into where you guys are headed there.
So historically at AHN, an APP had a attestation that was billed at the system level. So this is what when they're writing their note, they have like a smart phrase, right? And ours is .app hospital attest. And there were like 3 different options in there. And they would have to kind of decide, the APP would have to decide, okay, am I working by myself? Is the physician going to be seeing the patient later? Kind of some things that could be unknowable at the time that the APP is writing their note, right? So basically now what we've done is we've done some optimizations, and our APPs basically just say that they rendered services that day. They say if it was their services initial or subsequent time seeing the patient. And then they say if they are going to be billing based upon medical decision-making or time. And then what that leads to is then the physician has the opportunity to just straight up co-sign the note if they're just acting in their capacity as supervising physician, or indicate that it is a split shared service. And in which case, as Leslie talked about earlier, the physician needs to either document what part of the medical decision-making and plan they were involved in, or the amount of time that they spent with treating the patient. And what we've done kind of technically on the back end then is automate what CMS requires for these split shared visits, which is an FS modifier that appends to the charge. We've modified, or we've appended that to the charge if they pick the split shared attestation from the physician's perspective.
How did you do that automation? Just thinking, like we know as, being engaged with AHN that they're on Epic, but how are you guys leveraging, what elements of Epic are you guys leveraging to do that modifier component? And then who's doing that validation of the modifier to ensure that the system works correctly?
Well, it's a little bit tricky right now because Epic has done some development with the anticipation of what CMS thought they were going to do in 2024 and what they still might do in 2025, which is if you're doing split shared, it has to be based upon exact time. So Epic has done development where if you are documenting exact time, supposedly you can add together those 2 different times from the APP and the physician, and then slap the modifier on and even indicate which provider spent the most time, and that provider is the billing provider, and all kinds of fancy stuff. Because time is not required yet for split shared, we didn't go down that road yet. And so what we are doing is just based upon the attestation that the physician picks, which is called a smart data element, then we apply the FS modifier through the charge router to that charge. And there are still some tricky things right now with that workflow for us, and where sometimes the FS modifier is being applied a little bit more often than we would like it to multiple E&Ms over the course of this day. And we're kind of working on that, but we're in kind of a phase 1 approach right now of this workflow because we are still we obviously are still letting our APPs and physicians drop charges based upon medical decision-making and plan, as we will do until CMS changes their mind again.
And just to add to that, with the attestations that we've developed, because again, shared split, and it's, a physician has to also provide treatment to the patient that day. It doesn't have to be, face to face, but they have to provide treatment. And so that they could be looking at, labs, they could be collaborating with that APP to develop the plan. So what we've done kind of with our attestation is There's some keywords that stay there. There's some suggestions, right, of the physician that will go away, kind of like prompts, but then they go away, which give them the opportunity then to comment and add what it is that they did to provide that service. So it's not just I provided a shared split with my APP and then it's the end, right? It's I provided a shared split with my APP and this develop the plan, which is, or agree with my APP and the additional changes are, and here's what we're doing with the plan. Because again, the physician may have totally developed the plan, maybe the APP did, but then he came in later, he or she came in later, the physician, and needed to add something. So that part of it is all there. I just wanted to kind of give some background on that because it's important, right? They can't just say I provided a shared split. They need to document what it is in order to qualify as a shared split visit.
And that's a really good point. I think going back to the education that we were talking about earlier, I mean, you can have as many presentations, we can give as many presentations, we can have our FAQs, we can have our epic tip sheets. But one thing that we've really tried to do in our workflows is in these attestations embed somewhat, as Leslie alluded to, disappearing text, that at the point that the APPs and the physicians are writing their notes and they're choosing these attestations, they're reminded, hey, here's where you need to document your medical decision making, or here's where you need to document what you spent the time on. And so you can build these prompts in your attestations and your smart data elements that guide the clinician on what the documentation expectations are. And we found that, you know, if nothing else, if people aren't going to read, if they aren't going to read the tip sheet, if they aren't going to attend our presentation, if they aren't going to get a chance to read our 12-page FAQ, they'll see that when they're documenting.
What have you guys run into anywhere where the physician and the APP, or for those early careerists that might not know what an APP is, a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant, those are typically the APP mid-levels, where they don't agree who actually did the bulk of the work and who should be recovering? I mean, knowing from my finance days, right, we base physician and APP reimbursement and crediting reimbursement based off the RVUs. And now if they're having to split that and share a component of that, I could see some tension between some specialists and non-specialists and their APPs of who actually did the bulk of the work and who should get the majority of that RVU count.
So I can address that in a couple different ways. You know, you are right, work RVUs tend to tie up to revenue and reimbursement, right? And so we know that's a sticky subject. I know AHN has undertaken work to look at how all of, you know, work RVUs are allocated. So through this project, we have, you know, kind of stayed out of that realm and allowed the institute leaderships to always address the work RVU components. Because, you know, we have to do the right thing from a documentation and a billing perspective. I haven't seen anywhere people are like, I should have done it and you shouldn't have done it. One of our messaging and branding really is, you know, work collaboratively with your APPs, know what you're going to do. Because again, maybe Jen is pushing to utilize our APPs to the top of their license. I think Jen mentioned it earlier. It's important because if they can continue to treat the patients and maybe the physician needs to go see a patient of a higher acuity, that gives them both the opportunity, you know, to see patients at the same time. And as we know, revenue can come in. So again, you know, having that really good working relationship with their APP is to say, you know, you handle, you know, patients A, B, and C, they're here days 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to take the new patients 1 and 2. So we haven't seen that happen just yet. I don't know, Jen, if you have anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you hit it spot on. I think that we are working on updating, and AHM leadership is very much behind this, the culture of it doesn't always have to be the physician who drops the charge, and not every visit is a split shared visit. And so I think we are working on empowering our APPs where appropriate to drop the charge. And, you know, even though the reimbursement is different for APPs versus physicians, typically most contracts have APPs reimbursed at 85% of what you get for a physician charge. like Leslie said, it opens, if APPs are working to the top of their license, it opens up more efficiencies and opportunities for physicians to see more patients.
And I know you mentioned earlier, Jen, that there was an APP work group. And I'm curious, like what involvement do you have from clinicians and APPs just as far as getting plugged in and crafting these workflows, and how have they received it? Like, has there been a lot of pushback? Has there been, I'm just curious, like what the senses, the feelings are out there amongst that group.
Do you want to take it, Leslie, or do you want me to?
I would say, in Jen and I, like we mentioned earlier, I know we're talking shared split and hospital workflow today, but this all started with the clinic workflow and incident to billing and a very similar project, right? So I think at first we definitely certainly had some challenges. You mentioned like Evan, the who gets the credit kind of thing, who's working, who gets it. We had a lot of that initially when we were doing it in the clinic workflows, and we created that attestation and that piece of it. We did have champion institutes, so we had APP and physician and institute leadership on in those meetings, right? So we didn't go to the table with it just being compliance and coding and Jen, right? We had a lot of people involved. It was very multidisciplinary. So as we moved, got the clinic piece up and running, I think we moved on to the shared split in the hospital. We had a much easier, I want to say, transition and buy-in and understanding from the clinical teams, and a lot of collaboration and a lot of great efforts. And some of our lead APPs, bringing things back from their groups, etc. So I think this round has been much smoother, in my opinion, than we had in that first group. And I think, again, that's that collaboration and bringing the key people to the table at the beginning, and not, hey, this is what we're doing, and by the way, it goes live tomorrow, and get it done, right? So they have those opportunities to be involved in the process all along.
We have on both sides, both clinic and hospital, we've had physician and APP leads and champions. And then you heard Leslie say multidisciplinary group. So we've had this group together working on the clinic and hospital for what, 3 years now, Leslie, probably.
Yes.
And so we, like we said, over the course of time, we've had different institute SLEPs involved. If they were a pilot site or a pilot group, we've had different levels of IT involvement, depending on if we're working with Epicare ambulatory or inpatient workflows. We have had just a wide variety of people, and a lot of the same people who've been working on it the whole time. And so I think a couple of things that have been, awesome there is that there is a place where people can come for questions, and it's not just coding or just compliance or just RI. It's literally the multidisciplinary group. And it's also a good way to say, but a multidisciplinary group decided this, as opposed to Deb from coding or Leslie from compliance.
Right. I would agree. I think one of our big challenges, and I don't know if that's a question later on, or I'm just foreshadowing in my head that I wanted to mention though, that we've found is that because Epic allows physicians to create their own attestations, now that we have these standard attestations that we need for the workflows so that it drives, downstream and the FS modifier, application, etc. The one challenge, I think Jen would agree, we're trying that messaging, as we talked about, getting the message to the right people, is we don't want them using those handmade attestations anymore. They're self-grown, right? And there's no way just to like kind of blow them out of the system. They're still there, and in their smart choices. I may be using the Epic terminology wrong, but we want them to be able to use what we have developed. And so I think that would be one of just the biggest challenges to get them on board with that. I don't know, Jen, if you wanted to add anything more to that, as it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we've spent hours, probably a month collectively of working time doing education sessions, meeting with people in small groups, meeting with people in large groups, going to division meetings and things like that. And AHN is a huge, huge healthcare organization. And so it's just, we're always running up against someone who said, oh, well, so-and-so told me 3 years ago that this was the rule, that we're like, well, Brian, it's not the rule anymore. So it's hard when you have an organization that is as large as AHN is to get that messaging out. And so it's just, we always try to be patient and understanding and knowing, like we said a couple of times, that for clinicians, their first responsibility is caring for patients. Our job is to make the way that they document and the way that they drop charges so that we get reimbursed and the health system can stay in business as easy for them as possible.
Maybe taking a little bit different spin on it, Jen, I think of you as our coding guru. Any coding tips or tricks or automations that have played into this split share work that you all are doing?
Whew, yeah, there's a lot. Hospital-wise, for what we're working on now, I think there are differences in charging workflows for APPs versus physicians. And there's a lot of enhancements that we could do. So like, for instance, physicians, when they sign their attestation on a note in the hospital, they get a pop-up that pops up for them to drop their charge right there. And sometimes, depending on their settings, they can see what other charges the other people that they work with have dropped that day. Sometimes they can't. For APPs, they don't have the pop-up because not all of them drop charges. So we have to direct them to go to a charging tab and chart review. And we're kind of trying to optimize that workflow. So what we're trying to do is obviously, like, with the charging workflows, make it so that from a coding perspective, there is less work for our coders on the back end, right? So that, like, there's not a lot of duplicate charges that get picked up or get accidentally, like, sent out the door, that one will get denied because it's for the same day. We're trying to make sure that FS modifier being applied too much isn't a real issue. So we're trying to make it so that they have the edits that they need to make their workflow as efficient as possible from the coding perspective, but also make sure we stop things that we should for review. And in the midst of all of this, we've switched vendors for our charge review edits. And so we're trying to work on that and making sure that that is part of this, complex workflow as well. And so that's why it's just, we can't say enough how important it is to have all the players at the table. Like, we couldn't have done this in a vacuum without PB coding, without compliance, without RI, without our vendor, that kind of thing.
It's interesting that you say that the mid-levels don't have the same workflow as a provider, but yet, according to CMS, they are a provider. And every other organization I've partnered with so far, the provider and the APP workflows are identical, just because you don't know who's going to be that provider of the day sometimes as well. But going with Daniel's kind of theme, where do you see autonomous coding coming into play as more and more starting, especially since these are outpatient hospital-based visits sometimes, or even inpatient services, but it's still an E&M, and more autonomous coding vendors are coming into the space. Instead of having a provider select their charge or their level, having a system do it for a bot, essentially come in and do that for them, and really then they become a reviewer and doing their attestation potentially. I mean, it'll be, I don't know, what's your guys kind of take on, as the industry is moving more to coding it as an AI, because there continues to still be such a large coding and provider shortage now occurring across the nation. We're starting to see more and more technology rolled out.
Yeah, I think, where you'll see it is if, the time-based coding, right? So when you have medical decision-making plan of care as an element in order to drop a charge, that is a clinical decision. And to me, I know there's the grids and that you can say, this makes it a level 3 versus a level 2, etc. But I think until you strictly go on something based on time, that it's going to be challenging, because I think, again, at the end of the day, even as my team audits such things, it's the physician at the end of the day. Can you support your medical decision-making and clinical piece of it? So I think until you completely go away from that, you're right. It's going to always be an audit function from an AI perspective. But if it becomes like a time-based component, and I think that's going to be challenging too, because what if I'm in a record for 40 minutes, but I I had it open, right? And I walked away to go make my cup of coffee and you drop the charge. Well, did I spend 40 minutes on this patient? Trying to figure out the dynamics. And I know there's very smart people, that are working on that very diligently, but I think those are going to be some of the challenges, but I do see that in the very near future as we all look to resource, administrative burdens and those kinds of things. How can you get there? That's just my personal take on it. Jen, I don't know if you have anything more to add.
No, I agree. I think that the time-based is the easiest. I mean, just reading over what we're not doing yet with what is there with the Epic build of if you document a certain amount of minutes and being able to add together the minutes of the APP and the physician, and then, Epic being smart enough, and this is, without AI, this is just Epic build, like to say, okay, well, Jen, the APP spent the most time, so she's going to be the billing provider, like even looking at the way that build is coming down the line, I think that will be easier with AI. I do think, and I haven't seen, at AHN, we are doing some, a little bit of AI projects, I think with like codemetrics and the like imaging space and things like that. And I just haven't really been as involved in those. So I don't have a great idea yet when you're looking at what physician professional charge you're going to drop, what the success of those AI programs have been yet. But again, with the size of AHN, we do not have 100% coding review. There's no way that we could possibly, our coders could look at every single charge before it goes out the door. And so I think all healthcare organizations, but especially those of AHN size, will always be looking at, okay, what can we employ to help us do kind of that extra check, just like the new checks that we're employing with, a third-party vendor for our charge review edits, how do we double check these things? How can we run more sophisticated, algorithms in the back end to say, what are the chances of this charge being correct, based upon these factors? And I think that the problem is just that not the problem, but the challenge for us all working in this environment is just the time it takes to evaluate these AI vendors, deciding what is a good specialty for them to start and pilot in, where it works, where it doesn't, that kind of thing. There's a lot of exciting technology, but none of it is plug and play. A lot of it requires a lot more work than one would have you believe.
Perfect. Well, on that note, let's take another quick break and we'll be right back.
Claim Capital is a team of ex-Epic staff focused on preventing denials. Instead of showing what was denied, which is the standard for other solutions available today, Claim Capital pinpoints why claims are denied. By training machine learning models on an organization's claim and remittance data, Claim Capital can identify the causes of denials and recommend changes in EHR build or workflows to prevent them from happening in the future. With a completely HIPAA-compliant infrastructure, no software implementations, and a zero-risk pricing structure, organizations can quickly and safely recover lost revenue.
There are thousands of medical offices and facilities across America, each navigating through changing regulations and reimbursement models while striving for positive patient experiences and outcomes. A common element in each of these facilities is patient access, the front line of both the revenue cycle and the patient experience. Though diverse in facility size and geography, patient access professionals unite around a common purpose: enhancing the overall patient experience to increase patient satisfaction and outcomes. Through it all, one organization is there to educate, connect, inform, and pave the way toward the future of patient access. The National Association of Healthcare Access Management recognizes the changing role of patient access professionals and their increased importance.
And we're back.
All right, we're going to transition to the Wilshire Lab. And one of the questions we've been asking everyone is, what drove you to work in the healthcare industry? Leslie, let's start with you.
Oh, well, let's see. I wanted to be a physical therapist right out of high school. Went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, Panthers. Did not like the physics aspect, loved healthcare, and an advisor got me into the health information management field. And I loved it immediately, learned the coding, learned a whole bunch of things, and sat in the class and said, I'll never be a coder one day. Well, sure enough, right out of college, I worked for a consulting company. and did backlog coding all across the United States. And I just loved it, actually. And then I transitioned into managing West Penn Hospital, which is one of Allegheny Health Network's flagship hospitals back in, oh my goodness, 1999. They were one of the clients. And so I stayed here, and then we started our compliance department in 2001, and I've been there ever since. But what I do like about it is, I started as an auditor in that department, and it's always something new every day. So I'm constantly learning, constantly, interacting with departments all across, the enterprise, from physicians to different specialties to auditing types of things, such as EMTALA, HIPAA, coding, all of the fun things. And now I've had the pleasure to manage that group and the group of auditors that we have here on both the hospital and professional side of the house. So I do really enjoy that. And that's kind of my quick Cliff Notes version of, or Sparks Notes for those of you in the younger generation, version of where I've been in healthcare over the last 27 years.
Just as a quick anecdote, somebody I work with has had a similar career transition or career path as you. And it was funny. She was today, she got her physical CPT book for like the new year. And I'm like, you don't even use that anymore, but she still needs it every year just because she just like that was just like what she did.
It's a crutch. It's, I learned on paper, I learned with the book, and I still have my original books from Faye Brown. I'm going to really date myself so people will know she was a pioneer in the field and kind of gave that from 1997 or something. And I still have those notes, and I'll pull it out occasionally. So I get it. I get your coworker, because that book never goes away.
Make sure the joint doesn't see those. You do get cited for having old coding books on the floor. So
they're in my home office under my desk.
Jen, how about you?
I've never heard anyone call it the joint before, have I?
How about you, Jen? How'd you get your start?
Oh, have I answered this before in a podcast? I can't remember.
You might have. We don't remember. So.
Okay, we'll go for it. Well, so I wanted to work in public relations and advertising. And when I graduated college, and I was a communications major at Miami of Ohio. And when I graduated college, the public relations and advertising jobs in Chicago, which of course where everyone that went to Miami of Ohio wanted to move, were $10 an hour. And my parents informed me that I could not live in Chicago on $10 an hour. And so I got offered an interview at Epic. And I thought it'd be funny to come up to Wisconsin, because I'd never been that far north before, and just see what it was like. And they offered me a good job. And just like a lot of people that work at Epic, I was like, oh, it's cool. I'll stay here for a year or two. It's close enough to Chicago to see my friends from college. And I ended up staying for 8 years. And then that translated into a consulting career after that. So.
Perfect. Well, our last question to wrap up this segment is, what is one piece of advice you would offer our listeners who might be early in their career, or just transitioned into the revenue cycle / compliance space or IT space, that, we call them early careerists because it might be a new career for them as well, versus just fresh out of college?
I'll give mine, and I kind of mentioned it earlier. If you have an understanding of coding, and it takes a lot to be a certified coder, right? And not everyone can just open that code book, and I'll use that air quotes even though you can't see me, but open the code book and pick a code. There's a whole lot more to it, right? Jen alluded to it when all the different charges and the way that rules apply for critical care, but they don't apply for orthopedic care, or they don't apply to the next thing. But if you have an understanding of the coding and how that works, and you can speak to that language, that's really, really beneficial, because as we know, coding, whether it be diagnosis coding, whether it be evaluation management coding, CPT, ICD-10, PCS, whatever it is, that drives the revenue cycle, right? That's the piece. That's how facilities get reimbursed. So if I take away any knowledge and you're in healthcare, learn that, have an understanding of how that plays out.
Jen's like, I agree.
Yeah,
Any advice?
I would say that for my career, for what I've done, working at Epic and then going into a 12-year consulting career now, or however long it's been, 13 years. I think that my advice would be not to be scared of the projects that other people shy away from. I think that that's kind of been my specialty probably the last 5 to 7 years or so, is that there'll be a project and it will involve many different aspects. It'll be clinical, it'll be revenue cycle, it will be physician workflows, it'll be coder workflows. And it seems like I go into a health system and they'll say, well, we've tried to start this project like 3 times, but it hasn't worked. And there's a lot of moving components and it sounds a little scary, right? There's a lot of people to organize. There's a lot of different things that you'll need to kind of, it'll be Epic build, it'll be testing, it'll be communications, it will be, helping different areas, interpret how to communicate best to other areas. And it can be a little overwhelming, but I think those are the projects that I've learned the most on and that have helped me grow the most as a consultant.
In some ways, you do that at the Wilshire Group too. I feel like there's like random projects like Incident 2, like you're just like the expert on it because nobody's done it before, which is fun to have a person you can ask for the complex questions and topics.
Well, you can thank Leslie for that.
Well, yeah, we educated her on that, but I would echo what Jen said, because we did try to get the, physician clinic workflow project going off the ground it was about 19 months before we got Jen on board, or Jen was part of our team. And, she really took it by the horns, so to speak, and ran with that project and organized us all. And without that leadership from her, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are. So we do thank you for that, Jen, because it had been proven to be a challenge, for sure.
Thank you. That's nice to hear.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Leslie, Jen, and joining us to talk about provider education, split share, everything else under the sun. For listeners who want to reach out to you, what is your favorite medium of communication?
I can be reached at my email, which would be Leslie, LESLIE B as in boy, IONI @ahn.org.
Jen's like, you can find me at the Wilshire Group website, right?
Yeah. No, sorry, I was muted for a second. So yeah, same. My Wilshire Group email is probably best. j.krebs, KREBS @wilshiregroup.net, or on LinkedIn, Jenn Krebs.
All right. Well, that's it for us today. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you liked today's episode, continue to join Wilshire Wednesdays.
You can follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter at Evan_Wilshire. Daniel can be followed at Daniel_TWG. Wilshire Group at TWG Health. On Facebook at the Wilshire Group, or on Instagram at Wilshire IT Revcast.
Remember, if you prefer to watch, come check us out at the Wilshire IT Revcast YouTube channel.
If you have an inquiry, want to share your thoughts, or get additional information on today's episode, email us at WilshirePodcast@thewilshiregroup.net.
The best way to support this podcast is to review, rate, and subscribe. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
The Wilshire IT Revcast is hosted, produced, and engineered by Evan Martin and Daniel Bianchini. It is executive produced by Gretchen Case, Hank Smither, and Spencer Thielman. The Wilshire Group. Experience you can trust, results you can count on.